a row of box fans.
And this comes down to those who are able to contribute so much generating power. Those who...
Well, anybody can.
And the reward of that is you're earning money.
Yeah, it's...
by contributing that computational power back into the system.
How hard is it to do?
Because I wasn't too clear about how that works exactly.
Sorry, say what's your question?
Well, like, so you can earn bitcoins
by throwing your computer. If you got a great graphics card. If you don't, now here's your delay.
But how does that work though? In terms of
Oh, it's dead easy now. Like the people who originally figured out how to do it, they were smart not to tell anyone because they'd be the only ones. Because if everybody starts doing it, the whole computational market goes up. Your relative. See, the way you generate bitcoins, the rate that you generate bitcoins is your computational contribution to the network. Literally, if you're a 1/millionth. Then your chances of getting a coin, or your average payout, is going to be 1/millionth of 50 coins every 10 minutes.
Right.
So you'll get 1/millionth of 500
So
coins.
in order for it to be worth your while, you need to contribute a lot of computational muscle.
Right. So what some people do is, on average, if you left your computer running for a very, very long time, say this little laptop probably...
But let's use a better example. If you were a multinational, if you had 3 buildings and lots of offices, could you mandate as an IT policy that between 5 p.m. and 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., i.e. when all those computers are sitting alone doing nothing, could you create your own grid to start earning money at night via bitcoins?
Oh, people are already doing this without their supervisors knowing. People are doing this in schools. Now, most of them don't have great graphics cards because the graphics cards necessary are
because they're cheap PCs usually.
Well, they're for the cheap PCs at these places. Well, it doesn't even matter the speed of the PC. Is how many?
But do you foresee that happening in terms of a conscious strategy?
Yeah. A conscious strategy by a company. Well, I'm thinking about Intel. Right now they're using GPUs, which is the graphics. Now it used to be CPU, computer processing unit. Now it's GPUs, which are graphics processing units, are already 10 times more efficient per watt. Next thing is FPGA, which stands for floating point gate array. It's a tiny little computer, it doesn't do very much, but you get like 256,000 of them on a board, and the board uses 50 watts of power. Now these GPUs that people use in their computers can run 500 watts, which is pretty hot if it's summer in your house. It's not a time to mine bitcoins. Increases your cost. In the winter, it's great because you can offset some of your heating costs.
Well, and overnight, when the electricity rate is the cheapest.
Right. Well, we don't have that yet, but it will be. And we're blessed actually in Canada. We have very cheap power because I hear about all these Europeans. They're twice as expensive for their power, and some markets in the U.S. So they can't.
So that's an economic advantage.
Yeah.
So what if Canada as a whole said we're going to subsidize electricity rates for everyone who generates bitcoins at night and allows us to track it and tax it? Because it's economic activity. You're generating...
That would be brilliant. And Quebec would win because they have so much power. It would stop selling it to the U.S. because it's worth...
So is that okay? Here we're going crazy, but is that the source of Quebec sovereignty? They could say, not only do we have our own power, but we have power that with computational power can generate money.
There's too many militaries nearby. Though then again, Quebec has like half the military service.
So let's come back. Let's come back to an earlier issue around the tracking, where we talked about how one of the incentives around Bitcoin is that it makes visible, it makes measurable a whole bunch of economic activity that was otherwise untrackable.
Right.
And one of the benefits of Bitcoin is that tracking capability. We talked about how that might be a seller for governments in terms of why they would permit this to continue in spite of having no control over it.
I don't think they will, though.
But let's not speculate there because we don't know.
Well,
so until we have news that allows us to go that
very
route,
quickly they'll say they don't want, they're totally against it, and surreptitiously already the CIA is having one of the guys who's found it.
But again, that's speculative. If we're gonna speculate, I'd much prefer to talk about applications than implications, because where applications of this tracking come into play are both around research, but the social analytics industry is huge, right? The people who've developed the technology to look at Twitter, to look at Facebook, and extract from that both insights in terms of what's going on, but also, as we were talking about with Cloud and with Empire Avenue and Grader.com is another, they try to give scores to people's activity, scores to people's influence. Could those same methodological approaches, could those same technologies be applied to Bitcoin, in that really what I'm asking is what information is available to be crunched? Like if all this is out there, what are the type of analytics that you could derive based on the data that's being generated by all these Bitcoin transactions?
Well, if you had, well, I mean, you can get a full feed of all Bitcoins if you're on the P2P network. You're exposed to your client.
But what could you learn from that feed? What's the intel that could be mined from that data?
As it is, it's not a lot. You can see the ebb and flow because you don't know where they're coming, where they're going to. You can just see the rates and the sizes of the transaction, the granularity of the transaction, like how big the transaction is. It $1 or is it 5 cents? Is it $200,000?
So what if, and here I'm getting a little, not so much sinister, but I think in anticipating what will happen, what if there's an online retailer, an online, let's say, virtual game, and it says, play with Bitcoins, sign in with your Facebook account. So A, they're doing Bitcoin transactions with you, and then B, they can correlate that Bitcoin activity with your social graph.
If you don't use multiple different addresses in your Bitcoin wallet.
Right, but nonetheless.
People won't.
Right, but even if they did, they'll have one of your Bitcoin addresses. They don't have your full picture of your economic activity. But they could take your social graph, apply it to the data stream that's coming from...
Yeah, for sure.
And so what could they then get? I mean, does that open a Pandora's box in terms of tracking what people are doing and how and why?
It depends. I mean, if you especially, I can see people, for example...
like this is the argument for why Facebook would tie Facebook credits to Bitcoin. Because every time someone would exchange a Facebook credit with a Bitcoin, Facebook would be able to take that Bitcoin ID, map it into their social graph, and all of a sudden have access to a whole new world.
Right, especially if they have retailers, and if you use the same Bitcoin address at a different retailer, now Facebook knows who that is.
Here's where Bitcoin, I think we can totally invert it. Where on the one hand, it's being presented as, you know, a revolutionary kind of cyberpunk alternative currency, which it is. But if it was accepted by the powers that be, it could easily be part of an internet economy in which everything you do is tracked. And everything you do is tied back to you. It almost really is the argument that it's in the interest of Facebook and Google to embrace Bitcoin wholesale.
Well, Google's trying to be big enough to do their own. But
right.
I don't think... It's not... The way to make a currency legitimate is to allow the black market to use it. There's no better way to make a currency legitimate. Because if you don't, then the black market will have no qualms about making their own currency, which is exactly what has happened.
So the argument is, who's going to win the race to build the globe's virtual currency? Google or the black market?
The problem is the whole bridging of trust, right? We don't have to do computation to exchange Canadian dollars because we just assume the trust is there. Now,
well, we do a socio-political calculation that the Canadian government has the economic resources to stand behind the currency we're using, but that's largely unconscious.
Right.
Like, we do it without thinking. It's just part of how we live in society.
Right. Well, one of the major ways that you have to trust your government with your currency is if you can pay your taxes and not get arrested for not paying for when you pay your taxes.
Oh, sorry, Louise has had her hand up, and we've been too busy going back and forth. Go ahead.
I'm wondering what the group felt that Facebook would look at this as being highly competitive. This is what they're trying to do. So would they block this? Because they could.
Well, and I think that will be their first reaction. That you know, same with Google, that they will see this as competition, and that they will prevent and ban people from using this with any aspect of the applications that are both going to drive the currency usage on both platforms.
That's very dangerous, because if they prevent people from using it, it'll drive communications networks underground. Now, right now, anonymous communications networks are a little bit of a pain in the ass to use. And people will use them if Bitcoin is banned. But if you allow people to email Bitcoins through their Facebook, then people will use it. I mean, right now, Facebook already doesn't allow URLs for torrents. It filters your email, your private email. You cannot send a torrent link from one person to another, which is absolutely mind-blowing. People should be completely aghast at that. You know, if I want to talk to Jesse and mention, you know, hey, what about this idea of doing something illegal? There's a lot of illegal things that are patently stupid. I think there's one about not walking, having a lantern man in front of your car on Toronto streets. I mean, there's some laws that are absolutely stupid, all the way ranging to laws that we all agree with. Somewhere in there is your personal moralities in there. If you don't allow people to transfer knowledge, information privately on a system, people will avoid using it. So that's the problem. And when you're getting into social networking, because Bitcoin is a very, very extremely liquid currency, that is the one thing that has got advantage over everything. It is extraordinarily liquid. I can write my Bitcoin address, a bit of a pain in the ass, but I can memorize and write it down on a piece of paper and give it to Jesse, and of a coin, and he could take that coin and cash it if you want to. Now, that's not a great way to do it. I'd probably just find an app for my phone and transfer it to his phone privately, not over the cell network, not even through SMS, but just like Bluetooth or infrared or whatever, and transfer it. And that is the most incredibly liquid capital possible, and it can transfer around the network so fast, it's absolutely unbelievable. And that means it's going to be used for transactions that traditional currencies are not.
Do you have other thoughts or questions, Louise?
No, I'm just like trying to keep up with this. It's blowing my mind.
Now,
it's intense, isn't it?
It blew my mind. I've been doing cyberpunk, reading about this kind of stuff. Got to the point where I'm
decades.
Well, like 2 decades, and I'm or 2.5, 3 decades almost, and I'm more jaded than thou is I'm trying to pull myself back and go do stuff like gardening and biking instead of getting into all this hype. But even this thing is really, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. It's absolutely incredible. Actually, one thing that's kind of funny, if you think about what we've done, people are talking about the moral dilemma of this, and one guy had a great answer to it, and so I'll give you that answer in a second. The moral dilemma was, of course, being nerds in the channels who are developing these applications to the pooling application. For example, I'll talk about pooling very briefly, which is why it makes it social. Pooling is if you put your own computer on the network and calculate coins, you only have a small chance of getting one. You either get 50 or you get 0. Now, if you have 1/100 millionth of the computing power of the whole network, your chances are 1 in 100 million of getting $50. Now, if you'd rather get 5 cents, you join a pool, and everybody pools their efforts in, and the pools take different amounts. Some of them there's a little transaction fee sometimes.
It's like a gaming clan equivalent to currency speculation.
Right, in a gaming clan, everybody goes in with 30 guys, and they kill the big monster, and there's one item that comes out, and the clan figures out an equitable way to split people trade this and that and give each other
and
coin.
the experience points, too.
Right. But it also makes a social network of like tribalism and teams. Now, there's 5 really big pools out there. And one of them, the one I joined, is you don't have a private address. Your address as your membership on the pool is your Bitcoin address that you get paid at, which is great because that means that all the internal financial auditing of how the pool is working is exposed to the world everywhere through the Bitcoin system, which is the most incredible open accounting system ever. Governments would love it, and the people who are members of the pool love it. And in the other pools, you have to sign up with a private username and address. And that's a problem because they can do you have to trust that they're going to do that transaction and send you your computation, not skim a little bit off the top, because they're calculating what your share was of their total power.
And that's where I could see organizations, if and when Bitcoin became legitimate, sort of seeing alternate fundraising means of pooling their computer resources to actually engage in their own types of pools.
Yeah.
Now, we're pretty much out of time, so I want to ask you one last question in terms of a sort of conclusion, and that goes to the rate of Bitcoin's growth. And I mean, a number of times you use the word bubble in terms of describing the type of attention that it's getting, and your I assume implied assumption that that's going to fall off, that it'll sort of go back to a kind of obscurity. And it strikes me when we talked about sort of the challenge to Facebook and Google, let alone the Visa and MasterCard and some of the other major players who in themselves see the virtual currency game as them to be the bridge to unite all the different currencies. Can Bitcoin grow fast enough? Can it become normalized fast enough amongst users, especially internet users, so that it can't be blocked, so that it can't be pushed underground, but has to be legitimized and normalized as one of the competing currencies to unite all the others?
Well, obviously WikiLeaks accepted Bitcoins. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a publicly funded kind of activist charity group, and they take law cases from landmark cases and send lawyers, especially in case of a lot of the music industry piracy stuff. They accept Bitcoins, and they're a pretty well recognized
but
group.
Both of those are really symbolic groups in that they're both really small in terms of,
and they're extremely on the edge of advanced cyberpunk.
But in terms of speculating and projecting this type of growth, I mean, do you see it as possible? I mean, you look at the growth of Google, you look at the growth of Facebook.
I do, but I think that
they're the leading contenders to build this type of system.
So, as the cartels, the drug cartels, literally get more and more sophisticated because they have to and can. They're engineering submarines.
Because they have the profit motive to do so.
Yeah, they have submarines that the U.S. can't detect. They're making stealth coatings on submarines. It's unbelievable. And the U.S. government is just making sure that it's profitable for them by propping up their activities, propping up their profits with the war on drugs. Of course they're going to get into this they have all the computing power. They're getting more and more technical. They have hackers, black hat hackers on staff where they pay exorbitant sums of money, but it's nothing to them, $1 million a year for these kids. And these guys are totally going to get on this, and there's already that little site, which seems very common, just like a little community drug site, which I think is very, very interesting because it doesn't have the nefarious quality. You know, just like porn was considered incredible evil and et cetera, now it's a little bit more, much more accepted.
Almost as if the flip side of this is it'll normalize all illegal behavior. Just because it makes it accountable, it makes it visible, it makes it trackable, and therefore you're accounting for that.
Right, it's trackable, but it's not identifiable. I want to split that. You can track the whole transaction to a certain Bitcoin address. Now, if you suddenly tie that...
But I think a couple of times today we've talked about how it's identifiable using other sources of data.
It's fuzzy.
Which will always be available.
I foresee an overlaying, other separate overlaying systems that will come along and make it a lot harder. Definitely. So if the black market is going to use it, and they have the funds to push around that they need to push around, it's going to go. It's just going to go, for sure. As for the bubble, what's happening with the bubble right now is that it's just pushing all these kids to get their computer gaming cards and get like 10 computers, make enough coin to buy more computers, and keep on inflating the market because you can use the actual computers to generate coins to buy more computers.
So in the age of the tablets, it's sustaining the PC industry.
The game, well, certainly the graphics card for sure. Already you can't get the old graphics card, which was the most efficient per watt. Kids don't even care about how much power there is anymore. They care about the efficiency because they got to pay for the power. The only thing that this is doing is it's quickly pushing the market to the point where GPUs will no longer be efficient enough to generate coins, even if you're on Quebec Hydro, unless you're an industrial power buyer, in which case your power could be 3 to 5 times cheaper.
Because you're getting a different rate.
If you have a sweetheart deal. So I can see some corruption in there where, you know, why wouldn't Intel make a chip to do this is the next step. You know, I talked about FPGAs for research generally recently, but also people can make their own specialized chips, and who wouldn't make the chip like that? But also the U.S. government has their own chip factory. So they could put their computers, and people say they could try to attack the Bitcoin market. We don't even know if they're not attacking it right now.
All very fascinating stuff, and for an introduction to the subject, it certainly indicates that there's a lot more that we can get into.